Let's ask Rick Devine of Devine Capital whether Mark Hurd would be the right guy. Rick, let's just reestablish for everybody your creds. Introducing Tim Cook, another operations genius to Steve Jobs. Tim, of course, now CEO of Apple. Mark Hurd is credited with being an operations genius. Would he be the right guy to revive Dell Computer?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. If the investors see this as an operational problem, and when you take the company private, they'll have complete control of making big changes, then, in fact, Mark Hurd would be a great choice. If the investors see this as a transformational type of challenge, their investment thesis to drive a new type of Dell, then I'd question whether Mark Hurd is the right answer, or if they would have went after someone like, someone that was more of a technology leader, possibly possibly someone that's running a company that's more cloud-oriented, for example.
Rick, do you say that because Mark Hurd, some people say, we alluded to this earlier, that some people say he actually destroyed HP by slashing its R&D budget? We've got a great chart that shows what happened to R&D under Mark Hurd while he was at HP. And, if you're a big fan of R&D, it's not pretty. And here it is. I know you can't see it, but as a percentage of net sales, R&D just shrivels down to nothing. Is that why he's not really the technological visionary that a Dell needs? Or maybe needs, depending on your point of view?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if the thesis at Dell is first order of business is to operationally right the company, then I think there's a phase one where Mark Hurd would be a great decision. If there's a second act, if you will, which is what HP is going through right now, which is post-operationalizing the business and making it perform better economically, then at some point you have to introduce innovation, and you have to introduce a way to make the company relevant in the changing landscape of technology. And I believe that's the Meg Whitman's challenge and agenda right now. If the shareholders will give her the time she deserves, she has to move the company now into the next phase of its evolution. And that was the perfect combination that we saw with Apple. Tim was the operational partner of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the transformational technology visionary, and the combination of those two things was obviously a winning formula.
What kind of dollars would Dell have to put up to bring in a guy like Mark Hurd? He makes an extraordinary amount of money.
Well, it's an interesting point. I think any traditional public company would have a hard time beating the deal Larry Ellison put on the table for Mark Hurd when he recruited him as co-president. I think the public filings, his cash income alone is $60–70 million a year, plus he's got an equity component associated with that. So, it's going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, to pry him away from Oracle. Then again, you have the allure of him being CEO, and Mark Hurd is a big personality in the industry. He's been a CEO 2 times in the past. I'm sure that's attractive to him. I just doubt he would discount his current opportunity economically that much. So they'd have to step up to a pretty big number.
They would have to write an awfully big...
that's not pretty big. It's extraordinary.
It's a big
over
check.
$100 million for somebody who's not an innovator, who has operational excellence.
And private equity is not going to pay that kind of money for a CEO. They'll give him a lot of equity in the business so they can align interests, but they're not going to pay him up.
$100 million for leadership?
So, Rick, that said, Christina makes an excellent point. If private equity isn't going to cut a check that large, who, in your mind, are some of the other potential candidates to run a Dell if it's not Michael Dell, whether it's operational expertise or whether it's technological vision?
Well, it's an interesting, it's a very interesting thesis, and I think it really comes down to how these investors see the vision of the future of the company and what their investment thesis is. If you go down the path of it being a company that's well positioned, it just has some operational challenges right now, that's going to open up a certain cast of candidates. If you're talking about changing Dell to make it more relevant in the new world of consumer computing and cloud computing, then I think it's going to bring you down a completely different path. If you look at the decision that the board at Yahoo made in bringing in Marissa Mayer, obviously the thesis there is the company needs a vision type of leader that can transform what Yahoo is to what Yahoo can be in the future, which was a different decision than was made when Carol Bartz was brought into the company, who's got a reputation of being a tough manager and more of an operationally oriented executive.
Rick, before we go, you talked about the extraordinary combination of Tim Cook and Steve Jobs. Since the loss of Steve Jobs, since Tim Cook has taken the reins, Apple has obviously had a rough ride. Without Steve there, is Apple missing that innovator, that leader, that vision, and what can they do to save that off?
You know, I think he's done a great job. Very few companies have founder visionaries, and they're very hard to recruit. They're typically born within their own company, and they're not brought in externally. So you end up with a CEO as the ability to enable a vision within the company, and I think Tim is doing that quite well. I think the market's just been a little bit unfair. The company generates a huge amount of free cash flow. It's trading at a low multiple. If you look at its equity performance over the last number of years, it's been a real darling, but I think it's just in the media being beat up a little bit with some of the competition, but I still think he's doing an amazingly great job, and the company is very well positioned.